biggest thing though, and there's lots of people that will know that have had a diagnosis of cancer, is it doesn't just affect the person that gets the diagnosis. It can also be as difficult for the friends and family as well. And that's why Maggie Seed saw a need for a different kind of cancer care. And that's what we do here at Maggie's.
I'm trying my best to manage it as well as I can, but I'm not going to let it rule my life.
It's such a taboo subject, isn't it? Like, cancer is related to death. If you have cancer, you die. But I also thought that as well. When I got told you've got cancer, first thing I thought, who's going to look after my children?
There is so much support out there for people as well. If you encounter any issues, don't suffer in silence. There's so much support out there to help you come back. I came back to break the world record.
Historically, lung cancer, it was a really horrible diagnosis to get, and we found it very difficult to treat patients, and that has changed completely in the last decade.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast from the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland, and in this podcast we try and give you a bit of a how-to guide to help you overcome some of the myths, the fears, the barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. We want to provide both patients and healthcare professionals with tangible, real things they can do to help when it comes to cancer. Now, of course, we know that not all cancers are preventable, but there are things that we can all do that can make a positive difference to the health and well-being of our family, our friends and our colleagues. I'm joined again by Femi Odewale, the Managing Director of the North East London Cancer Alliance. Hello, Femi.
Hi, Steve.
You're right?
I'm good, thanks.
Excellent. And now this is a really interesting one, Femi. We talk a lot about the role of GPs in the cancer pathway, so I think it's only right that we speak to a GP, and not just any GP, Femi. Now, we have a GP here who was GP of the Year in 2019, no less.
Super GP is the title.
A super GP, Dr Farzana Hussain, Newham GP at the Project Surgery. Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm already blushing. I'm wearing a pink scarf on my cheeks.
Well, listen, GP of the Year. How did you become GP of the Year? We should ask to start off.
Oh well, I was delighted actually. So I guess the practice nominated me back in 2019 for the Cabora GP Awards, and I was really pleased to get it actually, Steve, because it was the work we're doing is very sadly, but not that uncommonly, my GP partner. I used to be part of a 2-partner practice, and back in 2013, sadly, he committed suicide, and he was my trainer. He was a very well-known GP in Newham. He was a program director and trained generations of GPs, including me. So when he died very suddenly, November 2013, I was left holding a list size of 3,500 patients. I had a 9 and a 10-year-old, and I was like, wow. What am I going to do? And he was like my best friend. He was my confidant. And over the 10 years, like, we took a day at a time. And, it was really, we were talking about the resilience, not just in myself, but in the team. It was my, at that point, 21-year-old healthcare assistant that said to me, we're not going anywhere. I still get emotional talking about it. We're not going to leave you, because I said to them, you all need to think about other jobs. What will happen if I can't keep this practice going? And I think the judges sort of, I think it sang to them, and it sang to a lot of other GPs about the resilience, particularly at this point in time where we know that general practice is struggling, and people like family doctors, and sadly we're losing a lot of small practices. So I think that's why I got it. So I was pleased, and I actually left the Project Surgery on the 31st of December, just gone after 21 years. So that was a real wrench. But I think for very good reasons. It's now part of a bigger list size. The practice is, I think, a bit more sustainable and a bit more future ready. But it was a personal huge wrench. It was my baby of 21 years. But just like babies grow, my kids have grown. I think it was important to do what I thought was right for my now 5,000 patients and the staff. So that's kind of the story to, I think, why I was awarded. I'm still loving working in Newham and working in North East London, doing sessional work now.
That's what I was actually going to ask. How has being a GP over those 10 or 11 years, how has it changed? I guess particular, focus on what we're talking about here in terms of cancer. Yeah, but how has your day-to-day work and your role changed, do you think?
Well, I think certainly over the last 12 years, I mean, I'm not going to get political, but we have seen such austerity in the NHS and public services. And, we know the NHS is so underfunded. I think if we looked at the recent survey, the British Attitude Survey, the household survey, only 24% of the public are happy with the NHS. That's the lowest it's ever been. And I think that is a direct correlation with, with the underfunding. We don't have enough GPs. But me personally, Steve, the thing that I was grieving and still am grieving most is to be able to look after 5,000 patients and that they were mine, if you like, for the last 21 years. And one of the loveliest things, like I'm 51 now, and the nicest thing for me was when I remember a baby being born, and she just had a baby last year. And, that real continuity of care that I think, I have to be honest, is going in massive. We're now in multi-corporate type practices, and I had to make a decision for my practice. It's part of a much bigger list size now. But that continuity is so satisfying for GPs like me. So yes, they're not my extended family. It'd be wrong to say they're extended family, but the relationship's a bit like that, you kind of know, particularly where I am in Newham, it's lovely because families do kind of stay together and, seeing the grandma and it does help medically. So there was a report out, I think it was Norway. They found that if you have the same GP for more than 15 years, your chances of living are much higher.
Wow.
Not only is it cheaper for the NHS, so we prescribe less and we refer less to secondary care, the chance of living, but that would make sense, Steve, because if I had known you over 10 years, I would know if you were looking a bit different to me. I diagnosed an appendicitis one day over the phone when my patient said, I've got back pain. And I said, you're catching your breath as you're speaking to me. You don't sound right to me. He came in, he had appendicitis. He said, you're a magician. How did you know that? And I said, I'm not a magician. I know you.
Yeah.
And I know you sounded different that day. It was just because he was catching his breath as he was talking because he was in pain. And I thought, that's not your normal back pain.
Yeah.
So it's been wonderful for me. And it's not the same being a sessional GP. I miss the continuity. But it's lovely to be able to do evening work because that's been nice for me, where so many people who couldn't get an appointment in the day, Newham, like many places, we've got a GP federation that covers all practices. So we take all the patients that can't get the appointments from 8 till 6:30. And that's really nice. It's nice to be able to help people who wouldn't otherwise be able to get an appointment in the daytime.
It's so nice to hear you say that because I think we have lost that relationship with our local GPs, haven't we? I think and actually that, those the stats you mentioned then from Norway, that's extraordinary. And you're totally right. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And I think I can remember my GP from when I was a kid, and I think now, book an appointment, and it's no reflection on them, but I book an appointment and I wouldn't really know who I was going to be going to see. And I think we have lost that.
If you get to see them at all, it's great for access. I mean, I was one of the, if you like, pioneers in Newham. I was doing telephone consultations from 2013 when they weren't fashionable. We were doing a lot of telephone consultations, and now there's online. And I'm a great believer for the people that it helps. Like if you're working, so you're up in Knutsford today and you need your appointment and you can't actually get to the GP. It doesn't work for everybody, particularly just before we came on air, you were talking about health inequalities, and it doesn't work for everybody. And I'm working in an area in Newham where we have over 200 languages spoken. When the Ukraine war broke out, I was speaking to people who, I'll never forget a lady saying, I'm a bit depressed. And it turned out she's just had a baby and her husband and her father were both still in Ukraine fighting the war. So she didn't know if they'd be alive the next day. So that's not something a little bit of antidepressant is going to help with. I mean, it's a real human tragedy. And when anything happens, Newham tends to see it. So it's a privilege to work in an area where you feel you're so connected with the world, really.
Yeah, but how valuable, Femi, to have a GP that knows her patients as well as this. I think when we talk about things like early diagnosis, we talk about working with smaller communities, different parts of this northeast London area, how valuable it is to have a GP that really understands those 5,000, did you say, Farzana? 5,000 people. He knows everything about them, knows enough about them to be able to diagnose something over the phone.
Completely valuable, completely valuable. And one of the key topics we've been talking about, Farzana, as well, is the fact that we do have such a diverse population. And actually, if you take your property, the areas that you cover alone, it is super diverse. And actually, the importance of having, a connection with GPs, a connection with the teams who are physically dealing and seeing things firsthand and hearing their lessons is so crucial. I mean, it's absolutely invaluable for us. So you're right, Steve. It's completely valuable.
Yeah, so important. And I think if we sort of turn our attentions to cancer a little bit, how do you think your role as a GP in the cancer pathway might have changed? Because it feels to me like there's probably more, awareness of certain cancers. Does that make your workload heavier in terms of seeing, more people at that initial stage? And is it then more of a challenge to know who you're sending on to be, to be scanned for a follow-up appointment? You have to be the sort of gatekeeper, don't you, a little bit?
Well, Steve, I'd like my workload to be even higher because actually Newham, I don't know if the stats have changed, Femi will know, but pre-COVID, Newham and Brent, two areas, Brent is in North London, Newham and Brent, we were famous for the wrong reasons. We were top for late diagnosis of cancer. So I'd like my workload to be heavier in terms of cancer because there are various factors for why Newham had late diagnosis. So it wasn't all that we doctors just were ignoring people. But if you saw in the one of the newspapers yesterday, they were saying a big headline, the NHS needs to get rid of all the translators. We could put that money into nurses. There's 200 languages spoken in Newham. I mean, I speak one or two others badly, but I don't speak all languages. The way somebody articulates something, you will know this, Steve, I'm teaching you to suck eggs. It's so important. So if I thought I had cancer, the first thing I would do is be terrified. So to be able to be fluent in English as a first language and have the courage to go to my doctor to say, I've got a breast lump or I'm bleeding from, every time I cough, whatever, is hard. If you can't then articulate that or you don't have the words, that's even harder. And we know that during the COVID times, sadly, cancer diagnosis rates went down. And that's because obviously a lot of people just didn't come forward. There was a lockdown and people mistakenly thought GPs were closed. As far as I'm aware, Femi, you'll know more, but I think that's gone right back up now. I think we're back to pre-COVID levels. But as a GP, I'd like to do more. And one of the things I've done, this may be a bit out of the box, and I know I'm not a typical GP, but I'm 51 now, so I got invited for my own mammogram 2 months ago. And I rang up some people I know in the NHS England media team, and I said, would you like to video me having my mammogram? And they were like, yeah, we'd love to. And I said, I'd really like to put it out there because there's a lot of, particularly BME women, for lots of reasons, who feel a bit shy or whatever, accessibility, and they don't come forward. So if we look at our South Asian women, the screening rate is much lower than our comparators for Caucasian women. So I wanted to video my own mammogram they didn't do anything pornographic. It was just like the bits, like they kept out some of the bits. But we wanted to put it out there because I wanted to think, I was nervous going for my mammogram. I've never had a mammogram before. I wasn't sure whether they would find anything. I had all the same nerves, even though I'm a GP, as any woman would have. And I wanted to share it because I thought, well, if somebody can go and think, oh, actually, a headscarf-wearing woman does go for her mammogram, and there's no shame in that, and there's no stigma in that, and it's not anti-religious, and you don't need someone to take you. You can just walk up yourself. If we can get 2 or 3 women even to go for a mammogram, I might have saved a life. And that's really important to me.
It's massively important. You sort of touched on a couple of the reasons there, but why do you think what are some more of the reasons maybe that why the screening uptake isn't as high as it might be?
The main one is, I think people just don't know. I think it is a lack of us. So until I became a doctor, I didn't know 1 in 8 women get breast cancer. So if we look at the team I used to work with, I used to run a team of 10 of us. So that means that somebody in my team, who were all women, is going to get breast cancer. If we think most of us know 8 people, if we're calling our friends for a birthday party, we generally invite about 8 people. So at least, unless you don't have any friends, bless you. But like generally people will invite 8 people and you think one of us will get breast cancer. Yeah. It's that common. And I think there's real fear. I think there's real fear. People will think, oh, I'm going to ignore my breast lump. A lot of people don't know how to check their breast. So particularly if we think about breast cancer and cervical cancer, I'm going to be a bit out there as a sort of feminist now. We're still very shy about women's bodies. We're still very shy about talking about our breasts, about talking about our cervixes, and it's something that's sort of not ladylike, and that's a societal thing. And I think some societies feel that more than others. And I think we just need to think that, I always say to sort of, I'm a practicing Muslim, and Muslim women I talk to, our bodies are a gift from God. I feel they're a gift from God. It's our duty to look after them. And the great thing about the mammography service that a lot of people don't know is that it's all female. Yeah. Absolutely all female. So, so there's a lot of little bits of information that people just don't know. They might think they're seeing a man. They might think, is it really that important? I feel fine. I haven't got time in my busy day. And there just might be, a real fear of, am I communicating right? Is it going to be painful? That's why I made the video, because it wasn't painful at all. It was just a bit of it was a pressure. I said it was better than having a blood test, which I didn't know until I'd gone. I was a bit scared as well, but, I didn't know until I'd had my mammogram. So
actually, I had a question for Farzana, actually, really, which was, you gave the example of the video, that you took to try and, encourage, people from other societies to really come forward. Is there anything else that you feel could be done? I mean, from a GP's perspective and from a patient's perspective, is there anything else that you feel could be done? I mean, given what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis, you've got much more engagement with the patients because you're seeing things firsthand.
So this is a bit outside my GP role, but I really live that. We have this mantra, don't we? Making every contact count. We generally mean that in the consulting room, but I take it outside the consulting room. So if I'm talking about anything, so if I'm doing, because as you can see, I like to talk a lot. So I tend to get invited for a few talks and things. And if I do any community events, I will talk about these things because I think somebody needs to start the conversation. And when you start the conversation, then the anxieties come to light. People, because human beings are human beings, right? And sometimes when you're in a consulting room, no matter what anybody says, and we do a lot about personalized care and shared decision making, I don't know if you'd agree, Steve. I mean, there's always a bit of a power balance. I know there shouldn't be, but like I'm in to see the doctor, there's still a little bit of, I want to be a bit respectful with the doctor, and I need to listen to the doctor. And I find that when I'm outside the consulting room, that tends to disappear. So like if I'm like at the moment, we've got Ramadan fasting month going on. So I'm off to evening prayers, and I'll just talk to ladies there and, like just in conversation, and the little bits of information that I've shared, and I didn't know that they didn't know. So I think there's still a massive education gap. So it's a lesson to myself about how much more very basic education, like I think of it as like a car. Like when I take my car in for servicing, I know nothing about the car. I can barely just know where the handbrake is, how to fill the petrol. So when they give me the summary sheet, and we did this and we did this and we did this, like they might as well be speaking a completely, Martian for all I know. And I need to remember that for when I'm explaining things to people, because there is a lot of knowledge that sometimes we as doctors think that people know, and some might, but not everybody knows that. So I think my 3 tips is making every contact count wherever we are. I mean, we're not just doctors, we're human beings. We can always spread any knowledge we have. This is a harder one, trying to cultivate an environment where people feel safe to ask. So one of the things we have, Steve, is that you didn't come for your screening appointment. So it's immediately a judgment. And then, so someone says that to you, you're not going to come next time because you already had the finger wagged at you.
Yeah.
You didn't go for your mammogram, you didn't attend. So I think that's, we need to change that round as to why people are not going rather than telling them off. And the third thing is if we can share our real life experiences. So my mammogram was about me as a person. It wasn't me preaching as a doctor. I had the same anxieties that any. I didn't know whether it would hurt. I didn't know you couldn't wear spray on deodorant. You need to wear roll-on deodorant. Just little things like that I'd never known before.
It's so interesting. The language thing is, I was thinking the other day we had a guy come over to fix our boiler and after he'd fixed it, he came into the kitchen and he explained what he'd done. And honestly, he could have been speaking French. My dad said to me later on, and he's an engineer, he understands these things. And he said, so what was the problem then? I said, I haven't got the foggiest. I really couldn't. Something needed, something was flat, and I really wouldn't have the foggiest. And it's so true, isn't it? We talk about like things like your first appointment when perhaps you're first diagnosed after after your scan or after your biopsies or whatever. Taking people with you, is so important, isn't it? Because this information comes at you at 100 miles an hour at a time when you're feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And the way that not just GPs but everyone through the pathway talks to the patients is so crucial, isn't it?
And it's fascinating, Steve, because I bet when your boiler man was talking to you, I mean, I don't know if you're like me, but I nod along.
I was nodding along.
Even say like, I don't understand what you're saying. No. I just nod along. So we think that they like understand. And I should get better because I see this. So a lot of GP consulting is when people have had a diagnosis of breast cancer or lung cancer, and they come back to us to say, I didn't quite understand what the consultant said, but luckily I've got the letter. So there are a lot of consultations where really I'm just saying it again for them, where they're in a more sort of a calm manner. And that's nobody's fault. I think the consultant also probably did say it, but like you say, at that point, you're not in the right frame of mind to take a lot of information. And I'm not blaming my secondary care colleagues because obviously they're trying to get to treatment. They obviously want to make sure that they're treating this cancer to get people well again. And that's where I think a lot of the GP skills come in. So something I did, this is more than 10 years ago, actually about 15, I couldn't keep it going because we didn't get any funding. But I had a 36-year-old lady, very young lady with breast cancer, who sadly actually did pass away. But then I had a lady who was 50. And my 50-year-old was taking it very well and was, really, my 36-year-old wasn't taking it well at all. And I asked them both if I had their permission to put them in touch. They both agreed. And my 50-something-year-old took her to Marks and Spencer's, showed her all the mastectomy bras. It was just information I didn't have. And it was one of my finest moments because I thought I knew what information I couldn't provide. Yeah. And we couldn't keep it going because we didn't get any funding from the PCT at the time. I couldn't pay my patients. They were all giving time. But I thought that would be a scheme that I think would really benefit people because my 36-year-old was a very young woman with a small child. So her goals were how to look after her toddler and how to feel attractive after mastectomy. Yeah. And as soon as she saw these fabulous bras that only now I know M&S do, she was happy with her shape and everything. No matter what I or the consultant would have said to her about, and your chemo's this and your chemo's that wasn't her priority at the time.
Femi, I always joke with Femi during these podcasts that I can see his mind whirring, the cogs going. Which cogs are going at the moment, Femi? Where's the mind going in terms of what you're taking from what Farzana's saying?
I think there's 2 points really. First of all, it goes back to one of our earlier podcasts that we spoke to Pamela from and her experiences. And one of the key things that she mentioned there was around experiences and the power of shared experiences or talking to people from experience. And again, essentially mentioning that is a crucial, it's another, it's another area that I think that for me we need to try and find ways of of focusing on this, and focusing on some of the forums that exist also beyond the structures that we have, and perhaps supporting some of those forums to be able to do more of what you're describing on a much more on a much more wider scale. I mean, that's such a powerful experience that you just described, and I just think in my head, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, what more could we do? What more could we do as a system? What more could we do as a Cancer Alliance? What more could we do from, to support patients and to enhance the engagement, to improve the patient experience? And that's what one of the areas that was just going on in my mind as well. And also it goes back to what I've been saying as well. Not one size fits all. So again, I was just thinking about actually what other kind of examples did you have that we can actually probably try and work together and try and expand on a much more wider scale, or again, around education of clinicians. What more can we do around that? So those were the kind of the things that was just everywhere in my head as you were talking. But of course Steve can see that, so he was able to bring it back in there.
If you take just literature about a screening appointment, it's got to be tailored to so many different groups of people in so many different ways. And I think the challenge is vast to make sure that no one's slipping through the net.
And while that's such a huge challenge, in 200 languages seems so, so many, there's also real positivity and hope about the connections we have. So one of the things I did many years ago, when I just finished training, so I'm talking about 22 years ago, at that point, we're much further ahead now. We didn't have translated leaflets in the same way we do now. We still had some, but not in all the languages. I managed to get in touch with the learning disabilities team. This was for cervical screening, and they had a picture book, and I used the picture leaflet for all the people who didn't speak English. So sometimes we forget the resources that we already have, and we forget the universal language that we all have of non-verbal communication. So a smile and a handhold, which you can't do online, I agree, unless you're doing a video consultation, but you can't do it with a written online. But even on the phone, that's more verbal. People know when you're speaking in a kind tone. So, for example, when I put my two patient peers together, my 36-year-old, for the few years, sadly, she died quite soon. She was very grateful because she knew that I'd done something thinking about her that wasn't part of general practice. So I'd like to think that we had a good opinion of each other. She left a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I had young children myself at the time. They were just a bit older than hers. And I thought, gosh, she's just died. She's left a 3-year-old. But I'd like to think that although she's up in heaven, that I did what I could as a human being, not just as a doctor. Femi's point about clinicians, I'd like to say, even very, very young clinicians that I've trained, I was a GP trainer, and I work with a lot of very young locum doctors now in my current position. Their cancer diagnosis is spot on. I mean, that's drummed into them quite well. So we expect, Steve, that when we send 100 referrals to the cancer team, that 97 of them will be negative. Right. So our systems and our protocols, I mean, I've spoken a lot about patient experience and barriers. In terms of the medicine and the science of it, I would challenge, I'm going to say this glibly, any other country to have a system that's as good as the NHS, and that's free at the point of entry, that's universal access, that's so quick. A friend of mine has just found a breast lump. She got her appointment. She's a doctor. So she got her appointment in under 2 weeks, even though that's not a target anymore. So the clinical side, it's not all gloom and doom. We have some excellent systems, and we expect, and I always encourage my younger doctors as well, if you have any of the red flags, so we only expect that 3% of our referrals will be positive, which is very different to anything else. Like if we were overloading the musculoskeletal system with 97 cases that didn't need to be there, we'd get some horrible letters back like stop over. But in cancer, we are given that permission, if you like. The system works so well together that our secondary care colleagues colleagues give us that permission to say, listen, even if you've got 97 that aren't cancer, we don't mind, because we're trying to pick up the cancers. So I'd just like to make that point, that the medicine and the system is, I haven't worked in other countries, but I just think it is one of the world's leading systems still.
Sounds like, Farzana, that we need little clones of you all over the country, because you're doing these amazing little programs yourself. You're finding these picture books. You're hooking patients up with each other. Wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to do that? If the system was just doing that?
Well, I've got a little bit of hope. I mean, it's not as hopeful as I thought it would, but things take time.
Yeah.
So 4 years ago, Steve, we, NHS England, formed something that was sort of maybe not radical, but quite radical for general practice, something called primary care networks. So that was groups of practices working together. And I used to be the clinical director for one of ours in Newham for the first 3 years of its inception. And that has really helped. While possibly cloning me might be a dream, might be a nightmare. We could imagine me in your nightmares, new horror film, but also maybe not clone, but it did help some of our education. So if we think my primary care network, which still exists, I mean, that's part of NHS England's legislation, and I think whichever party comes into power, I think that will stay. So we look after 67,000 of our residents in Newham. It's 7 GP practices. And in the national spec, we have to sort of hit some targets, if you like. And one of them is cancer. One of them is thinking about cancer. They call it a Cancer Direct Enhanced Service. And we've had a lot of peer learning, like everybody has, because it's something we have to peer learning on early cancer diagnosis. So we chose to focus on, I think it was lung cancer and breast cancer. And our cancer leads came to us. So it's not as siloed and disparate as it was maybe 20 years ago. But I do think there's more to be done. And I'm a real advocate for the population health, exactly what you're talking about, working with your communities, because my community might be quite different to Havering, which is only 8 miles away from me, northeast London, but they're a much older, much more Caucasian population. So really tailoring it to your community's needs. I've never seen in the NHS the enablers to do that in a way that we have now. We've still got a way to go, but I think primary care networks and integrated neighbourhood teams adds a bit of a structure and an enabler for looking after that population, rather than just me and my 5,000. It can be me and my 67,000. And community groups, like voluntary groups. A voluntary group would find it very hard to work with just a tiny 5,000 list size, but actually working across an eighth of Newham, we could really get some traction there. And indeed we did, not for cancer, but for a project I did around youth knife crime. We managed to get West Ham United Foundation, a charity organisation, West Ham, very big obviously in the East End, and all the young kids love going there because nobody wants to see a middle-aged female doctor, but everybody wants to go to West Ham. So again, thinking about who we can tie into for cancer, like maybe they don't want to see a 51-year-old woman, but if we could get some people that hold traction. So when was it Jade Goody back quite a while ago now, over 10 years ago, but when sadly she died, but she did such a lot of work and cervical screening rates went up. See, that was really interesting, not only nationally, and I saw the same in my practice. So to get, we talked about breast screening, but cervical screening, we know it's the younger ladies under 50 who generally don't come, particularly in their 20s and 30s. And that's about right, because generally you're quite well in your 20s and 30s, you're busy. But because she did so much work, cervical screening rates did go up.
You've got Femi's ear for a few minutes now. What support does and what support could the Cancer Alliance give, not just you, but for other GPs as well?
So I'm going to be cheeky and kindly change the question. So not just for GPs, I think we have, so one of the things I love about working in primary care is that I think we can do a lot with very little. It's low hanging fruit. So I'd be looking at funding for little projects like the peer-to-peer with patients. We'd only need to pay their travel, and we're looking at like 20 pounds an hour. You're not looking at GP rates, it's like little wins that you can get, because that project couldn't continue because we just didn't have the funding, any funding, and it was a lot to ask for their time. thinking also about where we do that primary care education. So sometimes we have the best intentions in the world. So I was asked to do some Ramadan diabetes health education for people fasting. And I said, yeah, it's fine. I can volunteer to do that. It's fine. And they held it on a Wednesday in a local library. And I didn't go. And the reason I didn't go is because I said, that is not the place to get your audience. On a Wednesday in Ramadan, people are going to be fasting, they're going to be tired, they're going to be shopping. How about proactively working with people? Now, do it on a Friday in the mosque after prayers, because you're going to get thousands of people there. And when I asked for Friday, they didn't have that. So a little bit about local knowledge. So I'm only speaking from my knowledge, like how would I help my Ukrainian community? What I don't know that, but somebody will. So to know, to really connect with them and say, what are the events that might be important? What things to that community? This sounds like it takes a lot of time, but I don't think it does, because if we don't know, somebody will have that answer, and it's just that we haven't connected them yet. So there'll be somebody in a community group who will have that answer, and they might even have some funding. So I think we do the secondary care, we do the medicine, we do the targeted treat, I think actually very well. I don't think we do that badly. I know it makes the headlines that, they've lost the 2-week target, it's gone to 28. I think the medicine of it and the curative aspect is still very, very good. I think the diagnosis rates are still not bad, given the population we have. I don't think it's so much the doctors not having the education. I think it's that one step before. How do we help people get to the doctor? How do we help people get to the screening? Why is it that in 22 years at the Project Surgery, my breast screening rate was only ever 66%? Not even 70%. My bowel screening rate was only ever 60%. That's just over half. My cervical screening was only much better because it was on site, and they used to have a joke that if you come to the Project Surgery, unless you're a man, Farzana will grab you and whip you into her nurse before you even sat on the chair. So we made sure that we had open appointments, so that if they came to the doctor for something, or they came to get their prescription for something, we say, oh, do you want to have your smear test? Do you want to have your smear test? So we grab them in and we do it, because there's very few people that refuse. Most people are just busy. And that's the same with all screening. We saw the same with COVID vaccine. Yes, there are a minority of people who are genuinely refusers. Most people just have life going on. They've got work, they've got trains to catch, they've got kids to sort out, they've got to work. But if you grab them and just say, shall we do it now? Shall we do it now? This could save your life. And they're like, oh, okay.
Another thing as well that I was going to ask you, and I know I'm not trying to push us off topic massively, so forgive me, Steve, is that, again, my brain was just working. So we start getting better in all of these things. We start to improve. We start to see that through the awareness projects and work that we're doing, that the volume of patients coming forward is starting to increase. Because that's the consequence, isn't it? The consequence will be that there will be more patients presenting, and therefore the volume of work will increase. How do we, how would we work together? Because I've got so many ideas that you just kind of just touched. When I say ideas, I've taken so much points from what you just said just now, and I'm just thinking, oh, if we do this, when we do this, and if it is a success, which it will be, then how are we going to be able to manage and cope? And it's a question, I'm just putting it out there. I know it's another thing for me to solve, but it's.
Do you mean, is your question, how will we manage with, for example, the GP workload?
That's right. Yeah.
So we'll cope the way we've always coped, because demand has always been higher than supply. So I know that today, because we've got an election coming up, and it is true that we have 6,000 fewer GPs than we did 10 years ago. So that's true. But actually, Femi, Steve, when I started work as a GP in 2001, there was a 3-week wait to see even me, and I was the brand new GP. And if you wanted to see your favourite doctor, there was a 4-week wait. So the supply demand issue has never really been a new thing. It's always been a thing. It's just now it's more acute because we have got a more aging population and we've got fewer GPs. But we will do what we call the risk stratification. So, for example, when I was running Project Surgery, one of the reasons we did go to telephone in 2013, 11 years ago. Why did we do that? It wasn't because we didn't want to see our patients face to face. We could put 3 extra patients on because telephones take a bit overall. They're a bit shorter overall. They're a bit shorter. So we could give more appointments. That's why we did it. But what we can do, and now that we've got online, so here's where while I love the face-to-face contact, there's something very powerful about online. When I'm talking about online, I'm not talking about video consultations. So even in an area like Newham, where people said there was a lot of backlash saying you're excluding people who don't speak English as a first language, actually we found that we weren't. I mean, we were one of the first in COVID to go to quite heavy online, because what people were telling me is that on the telephone, because it's real life, like now, like I'm talking quite quickly, so I need to be quite fluent in this language. But when they're online, because the consultation is asynchronous, they can think about what they can grab their adult children in to help them write English. They can use Google Translate. So I had a Ukrainian lady say to me, send it all to me in English because I know how to change it on text into my language, which she can't do on the telephone. So we would do risk stratification. So if I saw 10 consultations and 2 of them were breast lumps, they would take priority. If I've got acne, I need the pill, I'm weeing out blood would take the priority. If I'm coughing up blood and I've got backache, the coughing up blood would take the priority. And that's something we do all the time. We do clinical triage all the time. So the workload might increase, but actually the clinical workload that needs to be dealt with medically, that would still work. And in fact, that would be better, because cancers that we don't diagnose haven't gone away. They've just spread. So that workload hasn't gone away for somebody like me. It's just gone further down, where I'm seeing them with metastases, bless them. They've already got spread and they're halfway to dying. So that workload that we're concerned about, that workload hasn't gone away. It's just I'll be seeing them later when they're much sicker and I've got more work to do. But the disease doesn't go away. So I think we need to think of it like that actually if you can if you tell me you're coughing up blood, it takes me 30 seconds to send you for a chest x-ray.
Yeah.
You know, it's work, but one of the nicest things about the cancer pathway for like idiots like me, like we're Jane and Jack of all trades, like, you know, don't ask me about the weird, wonderful, like lymph node biopsy staging, because I don't know. That's a surgeon or, you know, that's an oncologist job. But what I do know is if you give me 5 symptoms and they've got these 5 symptoms, that's a red flag for cancer. And for cancer, it's written really well, Steve, which it isn't for a lot of other conditions. You know, like there's a lot about women's health and endometriosis at the moment, because it's really hard to diagnose. Endometriosis is not easy to diagnose. Lung cancer, unless you've got a really weird presentation, lung cancer is not hard to diagnose. Anybody that tells you they're coughing up blood, it's an x-ray. Anybody that tells you they're weeing blood, you know, unless it's a young woman, she's got urinary infection symptoms, they're going. Anybody with a breast lump, they're going. So the medicine of it is not that hard because the cancer guidelines are so good.
Well, Femi, I don't know about you, but it's fairly obvious why Farzana won GP of the year, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
I think we could all do with a bit of Farzana in our lives. I think that was, honestly, such a pleasure to talk to you, Farzana. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about your work. And like I say, very, very obvious why you won a GP of the year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Farzana.